Connect TO Third Ocean, the show. My name is Karim Kanji, your host as well as co-founder of Third Ocean. We are here this morning with
Scott Howard from Coral CEA.
Scott, thank you so much for dropping in.
Thanks for having me in.
Really appreciate it. We've kind of known each other for a while, more online than IRL, they say.
Yeah.
But tell me a little bit about what you're doing with Coral CEA.
So Coral CEA is a open innovation platform for communication-enabled applications, which is, I would buzzword bingo every time.
Yeah, a bunch of buzzwords in there.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it seems that you are working with, or your name is associated with a lot of startups here in the Toronto area, at least. You know, a lot of people say they're talking to you, a lot of people say that Coral CEA is very interested in what it is that they're doing. So why don't you tell me a little bit about exactly, you know, why you guys are involved in the startups and what sort of, what sort of relationship you're having with some of these startups?
So absolutely, I've been engaged in the Toronto startup scene for probably the last 2 or 3 years. Coral CEA principally started out of Ottawa about a year ago.
Okay.
And did a lot of work with on Ottawa-based startups, and pretty much I came in to help expand out of Ottawa and get into Toronto first and foremost, and then hopefully west from that, I've been spending a little bit of time in Hamilton, trying to get engaged with the Hamilton community, which is kind of bubbling up right now, which is exciting to see.
Interesting.
And done a little bit of touring down to Kitchener-Waterloo to see what they're up to down below.
Oh, for sure.
Certainly very much engaged with startups typically. So we're looking for interesting communication-enabled applications, which is a really broad topic, a really broad area to look at in terms of technology, because pretty much anything could fall into that category.
Sure. Broad, but also very specific as well.
Yeah, so we typically look at stuff that's very networked. So it's networked oriented, so either you're sticking two applications together or you're trying to create a live connection between people and a piece of technology. So that's typically how we try and figure out how to narrow that down. So it's not a static website, it's a website that's kind of connecting multiple websites or connecting people into it to create an experience typically.
Interesting. And so, I mean, so you started with them about a year ago.
Yeah, I've been around. I started with Coral CEA in April.
Of this year?
This year.
Oh, wow.
We run on the government calendar. We have a government grant, so that's part of why we're oriented that way. So kind of came out of March and getting all those budgets approved, and I was one of those budget lines. Which being a startup before that, I really appreciated.
Well, I wanted to ask you, what were you doing prior to April?
So prior to April, I was working with fairly broad scope of Toronto-based startups on what their funding strategies were. So typically getting engaged, trying to figure out how they go find capital or find ways to get themselves financed in some kind of way.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just focused on here's how you go do a VC pitch or here's how you go position yourself for private equity investments. It was where do you go get shred, where do you go find government grants. There's all kinds of money sitting in the couch, so to speak, that startups need to go at, and then there's always, of course, the magic bullet that's called revenue.
Yeah, and so you were working with them to help them to get these credits and help them to discover revenues? Or?
Yeah, so I spend most of my time actually trying to help them find a go-to-market strategy. So how are we going to get to market? How are we going to get traction? Because the only way you're going to get the next step of financing is through demonstrating some kind of traction, which is usually associated with revenue. Sure. So lots of business development work around that. Work with the business plan. So typically try to find how do we structure this business plan that's going to get it investor ready, which the name of our company was Investment Ready Partners. So that was our concept is how do we help a company get from a really great idea or a kind of a first point of traction to where they're an investment grade company.
Yeah. Now, was your company at that time investing in these startups?
We were not doing any investing. We were trying to help everybody else get successful and build our success through those programs, because we weren't building a software platform or anything. It was a really scalable business. It was a professional services business, which unfortunately is a hard business to finance. Sure.
Well, because I'm very curious, because of course this past weekend we had startup weekend here in Toronto, and yesterday we had Technicity.ca in Toronto as well. So a lot of conversations around startups and business, and a few people are talking about, you know, how do we get to market? Can we afford to spend money on marketing? Can we afford to bring somebody in to help us go to market, or do we just build something and take it to a few consumers and customers and kind of get validation that way? And so I bring that up because I'm very curious, how did, at that time, prior to Coral CEA, How did you, for your company and for you, monetize your business at that time? Because I'm thinking, these startups can't afford to pay you for your services, or did they, or how did you manage that?
So that was always the biggest challenge of how do we as investment ready partners structure ourselves to kind of keep our heads above water to get to the point where we're financially stable, and then help our clients at the same time do that. So that was a real mixed bag of how we try to develop revenue. So that's why we got a lot of focus on helping our clients develop revenue, and essentially being almost a for-hire salesperson. So going out and working off commissions, working off referrals. So we try to monetize our network as much as we could. So as referring people out to lawyers, referring them out to shred consultants, referring them out to places where we knew we'd get a slice of the fee or a finder's fee, which was pretty much the survival mechanism that kept us afloat as entrepreneurs.
Sure.
And then on the kind of longer road path of ultimate success for our clients would drive a pretty good liquidity event for us, and working towards that and trying to keep our heads above water while doing that through the kind of referral fees, whatever small retainers we can get at our clients is kind of like, invest as us, will help you. We'll help you sort of give them a really good bang for the buck in terms of whatever could be afforded we would get in terms of referral and work our way through that. So it's usually about having that 10 or 15 clients on the go at any given time to try and scrape together enough money month to month to keep the thing sustainable, which was always a challenge, which helped me appreciate the startup challenge that everybody else in our industry has.
For sure.
Before the VCs come rolling in and write $1 million checks.
And so then the opportunity with Coral CEA comes along.
Yeah.
And so what was your decision in terms of making that jump from having your own business, working with startups, helping them to grow, to working with Coral CEA?
So Coral CEA really, to me, was an excellent way to pivot.
Okay.
So I was really looking at investment ready partners. The value proposition was more about us trying to help people do business development. So I was essentially for hire mercenary business development guy for a bunch of startups, which is challenging, not really a permanent scenario. So Coral CEA giving me that opportunity to get paid, which was great.
Absolutely.
And then and B, gives me a much bigger platform to help the startups that I want to work with.
Yeah.
So pretty much the whole mechanism around Coral CEA is helping startup companies commercialize. So really the focus was on how do we either help get over that product hump and get the product built by either getting more development resources added or find technologies that help it, or really find a market for technology. So I kind of had the market for technology really well figured out, and people I teamed up with at Coral CEA were engineers who really know how to build products. Okay. So it was kind of a good combination of it's a well financed with a government grant entity, so that was kind of nice to go work for a funded startup. Sure. Because we really treat Coral CEA as a startup. Okay. So pretty much one of my mentors that I'd worked with, kind of in my previous life, was hired on in January of last year to be the CEO executive director, because we're not for profit. Sure. Of Coral CEA, and he's kind of spent the first 3 months trying to figure out what was Coral CEA all about, what was the mandate, how are they going to drive that entity forward, and kind of the notion that he came up with was we need to get to Toronto, we need to break out of the Ottawa bubble and see what else is going on in Ontario. And I know Scott's in Toronto and knows a few people there, so that brought me in and pretty much joined the team in April and trying to really figure out what our value proposition, other than providing a fairly accessible government grant to startups, which is exciting and fun, but we're trying to figure out how to build a sustainable business ourselves as a startup. Yeah, so and that leads to my next question. Outside of providing X amount of dollars to Y company, what sort of benefit does a startup have in dealing with you guys? So our real future set of value is going to be centered around how do we create a really ecosystem-friendly, networked environment where companies can come in and collaborate really easily. So our Toronto scene here is really good at doing ad hoc collaboration. So there's lots of different shops in town that are kind of working with each other that create products, or working with each other on client projects, which is always challenging. There's a bunch of different business and legal and IP issues that come out of that process that we're trying to help mitigate with kind of doing some serious risk analysis around. Okay. How do you guys approach building that product? How do you approach the collaboration? How do you approach the market together? And kind of looking at that and figuring out how to mitigate that risk. And one of the ways we have the ability to do that is we're a fairly robust organization. We can come in and really structure up, provide governance, do program management, help go find alternative ways to get it financed, and do some kind of heavy lifting around how do we get this new product to market or to get the new product built.
Interesting.
Amongst multiple different people in the network.
Okay, all right. So you come to an organization with more than just a wallet full of dough.
Yeah.
You're able to help them out with legal. You're able to team them with different people that you've already invested in or that you consider your partners as well.
Yeah,
to help them grow. It's very, very interesting. I don't know whether you're at liberty to talk about some of the companies.
Yeah, sure.
That you've invested. Okay, so great. So
that's the open innovation part. We got to be open about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So so let's talk about a few of the companies that. Let's talk about. I don't want to name any of them because I don't know any of them except one.
Yeah.
But let's talk about maybe the first one when you came on board that you were partly responsible for bringing on.
So kind of the first two companies I got engaged with through Coral CEA in Toronto were a company called Broadplay Mobile.
Okay.
And they're a mobile application shop, so they do a lot of SMS work. So they do kind of SMS short code text messaging.
Yeah.
Which we thought was a pretty interesting platform for Coral CEA to investigate because it's there's lots of guys building that. There's not a lot of guys doing SMS text messaging because we think that's kind of got a longer trail in the market because every phone does SMS.
Absolutely.
Not every phone is an app-oriented phone or smartphone.
Sure.
So we worked with them to kind of help them take a product platform that they had in the real estate market, and now we're trying to help them turn that into a more flexible platform that can go in any market. So it'll be an SMB. So instead of just being for a real estate brokerage, the local dry cleaner can use mobile marketing. And kind of what we need to help them do is use our grant to help them finance the R&D work to do that, as well as kind of provide some internal resources around architecture and stuff like that we had to help them pick that specific product application up and take it over into build a more extensible platform, which is kind of our core competence around how do you build extensibility, how do you build APIs, how do you build these things that help other people plug more technology into either your widget or your platform.
For sure. And so, talking about Broadplay, did they approach you? Did you approach them? How did that conversation initiate?
So they kind of transitioned over from my past life. They were one of the companies I was working with most extensively on how do we build their partnership network, how do we help them go to market, how do we build a financing package to make them more palatable to investors and really help that company go to the next level because they're right there in terms of having pretty good traction in the real estate market, pretty good traction with building campaigns and delivering applications, but really are looking for that cash flow to help hire the right people, help get to the next level, help build the next product that's going to drive them to a really interesting growth phase versus just being sustainable.
Very interesting. And a second company?
Second company is our mutual friends, Big Time Design. So
yes.
Karim and Amit, and similar. I was in early conversations with Big Time about the Pulse product and how they're going to help get that financed and get it to market and develop a kind of a partner network around that. So kind of before even Coral CEA started, I was helping them go find
the
right people to talk to, try and find any way we could figure out to get to revenue. And we were reasonably successful with some of that.
Fantastic.
And then kind of just worked with the Coral CEA platform because it's very clearly a communication-enabled application. It pretty much allows the users to select what channel do I want to be communicated with and why and how. We thought that was a really compelling piece of technology, and it's one of the kind of core products that we're looking at of like, okay, pretty much almost every project we get engaged with, this whole social communication channel could be a very interesting piece of technology to add into other more robust solutions or more broad solutions.
Interesting. Any recent companies that you've come across?
So I've been spending a lot of time up the street at the Ryerson DMZ.
Sure.
And pretty excited about what they have going on because they have a very tight clustered community, so it makes it easy for the business development guy to show up and do a lap around the building, see what everybody's up to, and pretty much figure out whether it's communication-enabled application, which is typically most of them are.
Yeah.
So we've kind of recently, as of the last month or two, I think we funded officially at this point 4 or 5 companies there.
Wow. So how much, when you say funded, what's the...
We do project funding. So
project funding.
Yeah.
And what amounts of dollars are we talking about?
So we max out at $30,000.
30,000.
So it's pretty much exactly able to help you overcome a commercialization gap in your roadmap. So it's pretty much, I need to hire that developer, I need to do these marketing activities, I need to buy this piece of technology. That our cash is designed to go help you use that to get to the next step.
To get there. And out of these, these 4 companies, can you talk about them, what they're doing?
Sure. So we're working with Hitsend, who's built a product called Soapbox, which is a interesting commenting platform. So pretty much the concept around that is how do you take an idea, turn that into an actionable group of steps to get to a conclusion. So the way they use it in Ryerson DMZ is, I think we should get a new coffee maker. You post that as your idea, and then get the group to kind of collaborate on, do we like that idea? Is that the right priority for us? And kind of add more value to it. So I think we should get a cappuccino maker. I think we should get this brand, and then drive it down to a very kind of quantifiable conclusion of where did that idea go, and who participated, and how do we get to kind of an end result. So we see that as kind of an interesting piece of technology that we can take and plug into a bunch of different contexts from an innovation perspective.
Sure. Who else can we talk about?
We're working with ARB Labs, which is really pretty cool.
ARB Labs.
Yeah, ARB Labs, and they're all about gesture recognition. So they're doing work with like the Xbox Connect and a bunch of things around that, where they're kind of using gestures to drive application performance and stuff like that. So we look at that as an interesting application that can be licensed in a bunch of different ways. So you can take that into an e-health environment where you're manipulating X-rays and all those kind of different things through a kind of touchscreen interface, which is pretty cool. So we're looking at that as a very different way of communicating through an application.
Sure. Anyone else?
So we're working with Green Gauge and Lindsay Goodchild and her team. They're working on how do you drive sustainability goals through the organization. So it's interesting when the bank says, we want to cut our carbon footprint by 25% and recycle this much waste and all those kind of different things. They pretty much live and languish in the annual report. And there might be a sustainability officer who gives the speech once a quarter about how you should recycle more X, Y, Z.
But they help to actually enable that.
But they're building an application that's going to go through either kind of the mobile platform or the web platform to communicate really tangibly and really engage kind of as much of the employee base as possible on what those goals are. So kind of doing what we see in more the social gaming space of, what are the goals, how do I interact with them, gamify it, get people really engaged and participating in it, so you can not just say, yes, we cut our carbon footprint by 25%, it's we had 100% of our employee base participate in this, and when you're talking about a bank or a telco, that could be numbers. That could be 100,000 people.
Absolutely.
That are actively showing up to work with their recyclable bottle and those kind of different good things, which is much more interesting than the bank going off and buying 100,000 square feet of rainforest down in Brazil.
Interesting.
So.
Now you've also said you've gone to both Hamilton and obviously Kitchener-Waterloo. It sounds like an obvious place to go. Hamilton, what's happening there? Give me an example of maybe a company or some people that are doing.
So Hamilton is really interesting because they're kind of at the early stage of developing their kind of software startup community down there. So they're kind of doing like demo number 3 to demo number 2 and things like that. Where we're up here in Toronto, we're on demo 50 or something like that.
Sure.
So they're really early in kind of developing their community and getting the grassroots activity going, which is really fun for me to go participate in that early stage because I kind of came into Toronto and it's in its mid-phase. So kind of seeing the incubation stage of how do we go from 3 guys having coffee to 50 people sharing technology demos is pretty fun. And really seeing there's a lot of activity around McMaster and there's a lot of activity around Mohawk Mohawk College seem to be driving a lot of that activity.
And are they focused on a very specific vertical you find? Or?
So they definitely have, from a institution perspective, big focus on e-health. So Hamilton's kind of decided that's going to be an area of focus for them. So there's a couple of programs in the kind of universities.
They got the hospital there.
And they got big hospital infrastructure, and Orleans pretty well robust in terms of how they're approaching that e-health problem. So Mohawk's doing some very interesting things. They have a whole lab built around the Canada Health Infoway blueprint for how e-health should actually work.
Sure.
So it's pretty interesting because that's how do you roll that out and how do you build applications around that and get some kind of extensibility around it. We could go pay one of the big software companies or telcos to build the solution for e-health for Ontario or for Canada, but you have a proprietary system.
Sure.
And I think there's a lot of evidence that says proprietary is not necessarily the way to go when it comes to software.
Yeah.
At least not proprietary.
Or when it comes to even innovation, you know.
It's really hard to innovate.
Sure.
So if you're sitting on a locked-down Microsoft platform that runs the entire e-health infrastructure in Ontario, you're stuck with Microsoft.
Absolutely.
And Microsoft's partners.
Yeah.
And if they decide they don't like e-health anymore, the innovation's over.
Sure.
And they're also charging a lot of money, which is good for them.
All right. Yeah. And any non-obvious players down in Kitchener-Waterloo?
Non-obvious players. So pretty much I've done the lap through UW Velocity and the community tech crews and trying to check that out and see what's up. Haven't really talked to RIM at all. They don't seem to be very open to open innovation. Go figure. I don't know. I can't imagine when anyone builds maps or anything like that.
Sure.
But the company we kind of spent a lot of time talking with was Igloo Software. And Igloo
Yes, I've heard of
Software
it.
does knowledge management platform. So
Okay.
it's my easy way of explaining it, which other marketing people won't get mad at me, is the SharePoint in the cloud. So kind of lots of knowledge management, lots of collaboration, much more socially orientated than a Microsoft type product. So it's like very easy to share. You can get external with it. So it's kind of like Basecamp on steroids along with SharePoint. And it's pretty robust in terms of how you use it. We started using it internally.
Okay.
So we're trying to get better at being a compliant, to do gooder with delivering my documentation through that portal. But we're getting better because they make it pretty easy. So that's one of the companies we're working with because they're interested in how they extend their platform. They can keep iterating products and figure out, okay, how do I build the next feature for this, or focus on their core and help develop a network around that. And they're kind of focused on how do I get a network of other developers with interesting technologies to plug into my customer base, and B, my suite of technology kind of has the core functionality that a CIO at a reasonably good sized company is prepared to pay for.
Interesting.
Because our big notion is, Igloo might be getting however much, $10 a seat or $20 a seat for its core platform.
Yeah.
They can plug your application, your widget into that platform for another $1. That's $1 for them and 10 cents for you, or $1 for them and $10 for them, or
For sure.
however that works. It's pretty much that gives a lot of Toronto-based and Kitchener-Waterloo and Hamilton-based companies an opportunity to go, how do I get my product into an environment where it's much more monetizable?
Interesting. So a couple of last questions, Scott. Number one, like I said earlier, we just came out of Startup Week in Toronto. What value do you find in events like this for whether it's the community here in Toronto or any other city?
So I recently actually went down to the Hamilton Startup Weekend. So it was the first one. So kind of seeing the contrast between the third one in Toronto and the first one in Hamilton is really interesting, because what I've heard based on the first one in Toronto, which I didn't get to attend, was it was okay. There's a couple really interesting projects and then a few other not so interesting projects.
Sure.
And it was not a ton of hype. People didn't know what to expect. Now we're on the third one in Toronto.
Yeah.
And people see it as a platform.
It's a big deal.
Winning Startup Weekend is something that gives you a platform to launch an entrepreneur activity. You might not launch anything that has anything to do with whatever you build on Startup Weekend, although most people do.
Sure.
It really gives you a platform to go get access to the network of funders, the network of other technology people. You're pretty much saying, I was participating at Startup Weekend now is part of your brand, which is pretty impressive. I think that's one of the more important things that it's generating, especially for the people who participate. It's a great way to get off the ground and running. So not only do you get a weekend to experiment to see if you like this whole startup idea or like the people that you work with, or your idea has any validity. If you come out the other side with any level of success, there's a lot of brand associated with that, which I think is pretty powerful for an entrepreneur.
Interesting. And then finally, I know it's just after mid-November, but coming to like the Christmas season and the end of 2011, what do you see for 2012 in terms of both Coral CEA and the startup community here in Toronto?
So I'm pretty excited about the startup community as a whole. I think there's a lot of good traction. I think people are starting to get into revenue, which I think is the most important measure for any business.
Absolutely.
But I think the startup buzz talks a lot more about funding than does revenue. I think we're getting much more focused on revenue, which I think is positive. I think part of that is because a bunch of companies have gotten funded. There has been exits in the ecosystem, so I think that's going to generate lots of positive momentum to take us into 2012, kind of regardless of the overall macroeconomic situation. I think what's happening in our startup scene is strong enough on its own. For Coral CEA, I think we're going to get much more into another buzzword, accelerator space. So we're going to try and help companies that really accelerate their time to market for the products, or to accelerate the product development cycle.
You guys might be looking to get a space and bring them in and
We're looking at it very much, we're going to try and take a whole bunch of best in class out of the Techstars Y Combinator models and see what we can really apply to a Toronto or an Ontario context to help those companies get over what the immediate helps are. So we want to do much less of a, pitch your great idea, go through 3 weeks in a space and really confine a building, come out and do a big fancy demo. We're much more interested in working with very well-positioned entrepreneurs or well-positioned technologists or salespeople on what's the problem we're trying to solve that has a very clear end goal that's commercialized.
Yeah.
So how are we going to go solve this problem for a customer that's willing to pay, and then help them collaborate to get to a endpoint that's much more rapidly achieved than internal development inside one company or in a kind of ad hoc collaboration amongst partners.
Interesting, fantastic. Listen, thanks for coming in and for chatting about what you guys are up to and some of the companies that you guys have invested in, and all the best in 2012. And look forward to bringing you on maybe in a few months and talk about some of the new companies that you guys have chatted with.
Excited about that.
Fantastic. Thanks, Scott.
Cheers.
Awesome. My name is Karim. Thanks for watching. We'll talk to you guys soon.